We are joined by one of my very favorite leaders on the actual planet Earth, Jocelyn Frye, who is president of the National Partnership for Women and Families. Welcome, Jocelyn.
Thank you, Kristen. This is always my favorite show to do. It's so great to be
Yes,
here with you.
I love it. We love having you on. So,
Thank you.
I want to talk about all the things because you have such good insights, expertise, and actually action steps on all the things. And that means I'm not sure where to start first. But I want to start by talking about Women's Equal Pay Day. We have March 26th as Women's Equal Pay Day. That means that across all races and ethnicities, on average, women are having to work into March 26th to earn what men on average earned in 2025. Can you share a little bit about the importance of Women's Equal Pay Day, how it's not a day to celebrate, it's a day to activate, and what is happening with the wage gaps right now?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thank you. Thank you for having me. It's always great to be here. I'll say a couple things. As you already alluded to, this is not a day to celebrate, but it is a day to recognize that women and men are not paid equitably, that women historically have earned lower wages, regardless of where they stand in terms of their career level. This is true of young workers, it's true of mid-level workers, it's true of older workers. The wage gap tends to get wider as women get older. The wage gap, depending on if you're talking about full-time workers or all workers, if you're talking about full-time workers, it's around 81 cents. If you're talking about all workers, which includes part-time workers, the wage gap gets a little bit wider. It's 76 cents. But as you pointed out, what it means is that women are not earning the same wages as men, and they have to work longer and harder to get to the same level that men do in a year. And it's even tougher if you're talking about different groups of women of color. So it's important to recognize that notwithstanding our theoretical commitment to fairness and equity, that what's really happening in the workplace is that women are often being left behind in terms of wages and not earning at the level that they should. And there are strategies that we can deploy to close that gap. And we should be really focused on deploying those strategies and recognizing that absent those strategies, that we will continue to have workplaces that operate unfairly.
I want to dive into the solutions, but before we do that, I really think it's important to talk about the report that just came out from the National Partnership for Women and Families this week, which is the wage gap IRL in real life for women of color. We know, as you just said, that there's an average wage gap that is happening across people of all races and ethnicities who are women. And that due to structural racism, we're seeing increased intensified wage gaps for women of color and then also for moms and then also for moms of color, right? It just continues all the way down the line. And can you share a little bit about your wage gap IRL report?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you for lifting it up. One of the things that we wanted to do was to make the point that you just made, that people often talk about the gender wage gap, but if all you do is just talk about women and men, while that wage gap is important, it tells only a piece of the story. And that because of a variety of factors, when you look at different groups of women of color, those wage gaps get wider. So if you're talking about full-time year-round workers, the overall wage gap is 81 cents. But if you look at Latinas, it's and compare them to white men, it's 58 cents. If you're talking about Black women, it's 65 cents. If you're talking about Native women, it's 58 cents. And even when you're talking about API women, that's a smaller gap of 95 cents. What we know is that if you look at subpopulations, Cambodian women, Vietnamese women, many women from different Southeast Asian countries in particular, those gaps are enormous. So it's important to recognize that gender is one piece of what's driving the wage gap, but there are other factors too. There's race and ethnicity. We know there's occupational segregation. We know that there's work-family imbalances, the lack of paid leave, the lack of paid sick leave. All of those things actually fuel the wage gap. And so we wanted to tell that story. We talk about how you see the wage gap in different types of occupations and industries. You see it regardless of education level. As I said earlier, it tends to get wider as women get older. All of those breakdowns are important for understanding that there are a lot of different factors driving the wage gap. And that requires us to have a range of interventions. And as you noted, moms experience a wage gap. And a lot of that is due to the fact that moms are disproportionately more likely to be doing caregiving. They're caring for young kids. They're in and out of the workforce more frequently. And because we don't have policies like paid leave, because we don't have robust childcare supports, women pay the price. They pay the price, they have to leave work, they have to take jobs that pay lower wages, like a whole range of things that are affecting their ability to earn wages that are equitable in comparison to dads and other workers.
The last time I looked, and listeners, I have bad news. The wage gap under Donald Trump has been widening, not narrowing. The last time I looked, to Jocelyn's point, Latina moms were earning just 47 cents to a white dad's dollar, and Black moms just 52 cents to a white dad's dollar. That's likely been updated since the last time I looked, because new research has just been coming out this past week. But you all, generally speaking, right now, the wage gaps are getting worse, not better. That means we need to take action because these are not unsolvable issues. First of all, the wage gaps don't just matter to the people on the planet Earth who identify as women. They matter to people of all genders because women and moms make the majority of consumer purchasing decisions in our consumer fueled economy. So when we have wage gaps, we cannot fuel the economy that fuels everybody. And so, in fact, some studies show that we could have a GDP increase of at least 5% if we had pay parity. So the emergency of addressing the wage gaps is an emergency of all of us. And some of the solutions have been well studied. It's a combination of solutions. But Jocelyn, what's your take on what solutions we could keep pushing, or should, I hate to use the word should, but I'm going to use it, should keep pushing right now?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I will piggyback on something that you said about moms by reinforcing the point that most moms are in families that rely on their incomes. Two-thirds of moms are breadwinners. Those numbers are even higher for Black women, Black moms in particular. So the consequences of moms not earning fair pay is not simply that they get lower wages, it's that it affects the economic stability of their family. It is no longer the case that moms are just making extra money just because they like to make extra money. Their families depend on it. I think what I'd say is there are three buckets of solutions that are important and useful and continue to be priorities. And they really track sort of what we know is driving the wage gap: discrimination, occupational segregation, and the lack of robust work-family policies. So in discrimination, there are things like the Paycheck Fairness Act, but there are also strategies around greater pay transparency, reducing things like the use of salary history, all of those things that cement discrimination in how women are being paid. So there are those strategies that make a lot of sense. And also just quite frankly, making sure that women's wages are higher, things like the Raise the Wage Act and other strategies to raise minimum wages, because we know women are disproportionately more likely to be in minimum wage jobs. We know that's true particularly of folks who are in tip jobs, disabled workers. There are strategies just to raise the wages of the lowest paid workers, which also includes a number of women as well. There are a whole bucket of policies, as you well know, because you lead in this space, Kristen, that are around work-family policy, reducing pregnancy discrimination, access to paid leave, more affordable childcare, all of the things that we know are taking women out of the workforce sporadically because they're far more likely to be doing not only childcare, but just caregiving across the board. And the last thing that I would say about occupational segregation, we know that women are disproportionately concentrated in lower paying jobs and some of the higher paying, often what people call non-traditional jobs. It's harder for women to break in. So, there certainly are strategies to boost women's participation in non-traditional jobs, to push grants that actually expand access to women in non-traditional jobs, to focus on those employers, construction, trades jobs, to make sure that they actually have targets for increasing opportunities for women of color, and that even when they access those jobs, that you're making sure that they're being treated fairly in those jobs. There's a long history of sometimes them facing harassment, discrimination, not being able to take bathroom breaks if they're pregnant, like all the things that are designed to discourage women from taking certain types of jobs, even though they're higher paying jobs. If we deployed those sorts of strategies, if we pursued them and even enacted a few of them, we would be doing a lot to actually help to close the wage gap. But the last thing I'll say is that it's just important to recognize it's not just one strategy. It's all of those pieces together. All of those things influence and shape the wage gap. And so we really need to come up with holistic solutions that are designed to close all the different pieces.
150% agree. Not surprising. I love Jocelyn Frye. Love the National Partnership for Women and Families. Want everybody to get involved, support the National Partnership for Women and Families. And one of the things I think that it's important to also say in this moment is all of those solutions that have been studied and studied and studied actually have largely been opposed and rolled back by Donald Trump during his administration. So it is a moment, people, where you not only need to contact your member of Congress to say, please keep pushing forward, don't give up on the policies that Jocelyn named, but also make sure you're registered to vote. Double check that you're registered to vote and make a plan to vote this November, because we have significant obstacles where many of our elected leaders, and particularly Republican elected leaders, are out of step with their Republican constituents, because these are not partisan issues when you talk to actual real people. But inside the Beltway, Republicans and Donald Trump, MAGA specifically, has been making them partisan. And we can change that too. Do you have a thought, Jocelyn?
Yeah, well, I always agree with you, and you're right on point on this one. These are not controversial issues in most corners of the country. They're also very much not Republican or Democratic issues, even when there are variations in sort of uh, um, uh, emphasis. At the end of the day, large majorities across the board, across race, across ethnicity, believe in a lot of the policies that we're talking about, and they believe in fairness. People believe that people ought to be treated fairly and paid fairly for their work, and they recognize that discrimination actually does exist. So in that sense, there isn't a lot of disagreement in the broad public about whether or not we ought to have robust enforcement of the law, whether or not we ought to make sure and prioritize that people are being paid fairly, that we have access to work family policies. Like, these are just not controversial issues. And I agree with you that who's out of step is, members of Congress, Republican members who really are aligned with a very far right, I think very narrow agenda that views women's participation in the economy is something of secondary importance. And, these days argue, well, women really don't need to be working, and are willing to sort of strip away the supports that have been so critical to women's participation in the workforce, and importantly, have been eroding the infrastructure that's so essential to not simply, passing the law, but enforcing the law, right? And I
Yeah.
think this administration has been very clear, in its interest in eliminating the very programs that have been so essential to expanding opportunity for women. Their attack on DEI has been a strategy of really eroding many of the tools that have been used to expand opportunity for women. And that's what this administration is about. And that's unfortunate. It's inconsistent with the public, but it's up to the public, quite frankly, to rein it in. Because otherwise, we're going to continue to see those types of problematic efforts that really are undermining women's progress, day in and day out.
So everybody, make sure you're registered to vote and that your friends, families, and neighbors are registered to vote too. Thank you so much, Jocelyn Frye, National Partnership for Women and Families. Woo! Thank you for being on.
Well, thank you, Kristen. Always good to be here with you. You are the best person ever.
You're the best person ever.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.